Hello, everyone. Welcome to our episode 5 webinar, taking inventory of your PKI health. I'm Mark Cooper, and I'm going to be running things solo today. We appreciate you turning out. If this is your first webinar, this is our 5th in the series, and each month we are tackling a new area of concern. This month we're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to me, PKI health and taking inventory, trying to figure out the state of your PKI. Here in the webinar, we run things a little differently. We have a public chat area. You're welcome to introduce yourself. You can chat amongst yourselves as we go through. We have a Q&A area. You can post your questions over there. And if we don't get a chance to get to them as we go through, we'll pick them up at the end of the webinar. We also have a poll that's been running. If you haven't had a chance, take a look. Curious to see how many of you have actually had a chance to either assess or audit your PKI, and if so, how long ago it was. So take a look at that as we go through. With everybody joining us, we're going to get started. And let me introduce myself. I'm the president and founder of PKI Solutions. And I've been known as the PKI guy since my days at Microsoft. And this is really why this topic is so of a close relation to my heart. When I was at Microsoft, I had created the first PKI best practice review. This is similar if you've ever had an Active Directory risk assessment or an Exchange wrap. All of those kind of go back to the early days when we were creating these assessment programs at Microsoft. And the story really kind of goes to the fact that we were all originally hired to help Microsoft customers when they would have crit-sit situations. We would be dispatched to get onto a plane, fly somewhere in the world, and help customers get their systems back up and running. One of the smart things Microsoft figured out is, hey, if we can help customers deploy a technology or use a technology the right way, these crit-sit problems wouldn't occur. And that was really the genesis of the best practice reviews that turned into health checks and then turned into risk assessment programs. So this is a space that I've spent a lot of time in, almost 20 years now, of really creating programs around assessing PKIs and helping organizations make sure that they're running and are in a healthy configuration. So what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to take you through a couple of areas, and I want this webinar to be a little different in that I don't want to talk about things just at a high level. We're actually going to dig into a couple areas that you could use today, whether you're going to have an outside entity do an assessment or you want to do it yourself. This is something that will have some specific areas that we can point to. So we're going to start by talking about what is the health importance. Why does it really matter what the health of your PKI is? We'll talk about some of the challenges. I know this is not an easy thing. Having spent 20 plus years doing these assessments, I can tell you that the only way that this really works at scale is to do it through automation. But there are many things that you can do. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges in collecting the information. Then we're going to point you to very specific areas that you should be looking at for review. So if you're going to try to do this ad hoc in your organization, what should you be looking at? We're going to talk about some useful tools and commands that you can run to get the data. And then once you have the data, what are you going to do with it? We're going to talk about how do you do the assessment and remediation and then tracking that, because frankly, it's not just a matter of finding out what's right or wrong. You kind of have to go through a triage process to figure out what you want to do. And then lastly, of course, we'll get to any kind of questions that we weren't able to get to when we went through. So let's start about the PKI health. So the reason that this is important to most organizations is the fact that most people are operating their PKIs in a reactive mode. And what I mean by that is the PKI is designed, it's deployed, and you're issuing certificates. And most of the time, you're not really aware of the status of your PKI and its health until something goes wrong. Most of us tend to hear issues about the PKI when something stops working. Somebody can't request a certificate, the revocation information isn't published. Something has happened and then caused an outage, has caused some type of an issue, And that's generally when most people become aware that something is wrong with their PKI. A lot of organizations aren't really looking at this proactively. And just like those early days at Microsoft, if you are simply waiting until a problem has occurred, there could have been something that could have been addressed much earlier. These lingering problems oftentimes manifest themselves as an outage or something down the road. And especially with PKI, we have lifetimes that are weeks, months, years, or even decades long, that a very small problem that could have been detected today can cause a problem 5 years from now. So by taking the time to do proactive assessments and review of your PKI, you can find these things before they cause an outage. But if you're operating strictly in this reactive mode, you're never going to get there. You're never going to get a chance to look for these problems. The other thing is, frankly, most of the manufacturers, whether it's Microsoft or PrimeKey, FutureX, they don't do a lot of things to make the discovery of this information available. It's certainly there. We're not talking about secrets that are hidden away, but there's not a whole lot that's available to do the discovery of the misconfigurations. If you're going to have to go look for this, you're really left up to your own accord unless you're using some type of a service. The other thing is you clearly need some specialized knowledge to be able to locate and interpret the data. It's one thing to know where is your CA configuration data stored, how do you find it? It's another thing to actually figure out how do you extract it and how do you find what is right and what is wrong with the data. That's something that we have long dealt with in our assessment programs, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the collecting of the information is one thing. The interpretation of the data is the other part. So this is one place where skill sets and a little bit of experience come into play. The other side is when we really think about why we are concerned about this. It's not just outages, but if we're operating our PKI to improve the security, if we're trying to improve the overall posture of our organization, if our PKI isn't healthy, we're really affecting the security and the integrity of the PKI. If it's a misconfiguration where we're not using the right algorithm, then that could directly impact the security intent that we have for our PKI. And we find that even the best designed PKIs, we've seen this with organizations where we've been hired to create architecture and build docs, and they've executed on their own. Just because it's in your documentation, just because it's in your architecture, doesn't mean it actually winds up in production. Typos happen, people click the wrong button, misunderstandings, that even the newest PKI can often have lingering issues that, if left unchecked, can really kind of become a problem down the road. So sometimes it's actually helpful to run a assessment against a new PKI. This isn't just something that you would only do if your PKI has been around for a couple of years. The other side of this is PKIs change. As well as they can be designed and deployed today, there is a divergence. People configure new templates. The database changes. The security posture could change. Group policies can change. So our PKIs are kind of always evolving from what they were intended to look like when they started. So we need to take that into account as we go through the process of our life cycle of our PKI, of when would we want to do an assessment and when would we want to actually determine where it's healthy. Frankly, most organizations probably are not doing this often enough. Really what we see is most organizations wait till something happens, then they wonder why something happened. The other thing is, regardless of the size of the organizations, in my opinion, most organizations are not doing assessments of their PKI often enough. And certainly if we're talking about a lot of data collection, a lot of interpretation, that's a lot of effort. So we certainly know that there's a lot of mitigating factors that prevent people from actually being able to do this as often as they should. And as a result, there's some really interesting things that we have seen happen in organizations because they're not really watching their PKI proactively. We had one customer situation that came up where they had multiple HSMs that had been designed and deployed in their environment. And at one point they reached out and said, we're seeing something odd in our PKI. We went in and we took a look, and what we found is one of their hardware security modules that their CA was talking to had actually failed, and it failed 6 weeks ago. But because there were two HSMs, they really didn't see an outage. This was just kind of a problem that was lingering there. Now, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. One HSM failed, the other one continued to work. But because they weren't doing assessments, they weren't watching the health of their PKI, they didn't know that they were in this failure state. The reason that this is an important thing to detect is, had it continued on and the other HSM failed, they would have had a significant outage. So it's one thing to say we're going to have highly available hardware security modules or architecture, but if you don't have a way of detecting that you're in a failed state, you're really not getting any benefit from the availability, because you're just going to keep running until it goes into a failure state. The other one that we've seen is during an assessment, we had gone in and taken a look at an environment, and all of their CAs had actually been running in an insecure mode where they had turned off CRL checking. What had happened is, many years ago, somebody before this team was responsible for the PKI had a problem with their root CA, and the CRL had expired, and didn't know what to do. So they were getting these error messages saying CRL revocation checking failed. So they Googled something, they found an answer that said turn off revocation checking, which they did, and suddenly all of their CA started running again. They had run that way for years. And because they had never done an assessment, they never knew that this problem had occurred. They never knew that they were running in this insecure mode. We've seen issues where root CAs, and we've talked about this many times, they should be offline, meaning not connected to the network. But we've seen organizations that have parsed that semantic a little bit and said, well, our root CA, we're going to turn it off when we're not using it, but it is connected to the network because it makes publishing CRLs easier. It makes patching easier. And like most things in PKI, if something is making it easier, it's not making it more secure. So in this particular case, they had a root CA that they intended to turn off, and 1 year they forgot. And the root CA was left on the network, no firewall, no antivirus, no protection, because it was supposed to be turned off. It wasn't supposed to ever be exposed, but they forgot to do it. We only found that when we were doing an assessment, and we could look at the event logs and see it's been up and running for a year, which clearly means it wasn't turned off. Another thing that we often see during assessments, your CA may be running perfectly fine. We go in and we take a look at the statistics, and we see that your database has 4 million failed enrollments, perhaps, and 30,000 valid enrollments. So if we were looking at a 40 gigabyte database, for instance, with 4 million failed enrollments, an important thing is, okay, is this something that's still going on right now? And usually it's a template misconfiguration. Somebody's checked the wrong box. Somebody's included the wrong set of services or accounts in the ACLs, and the database is growing. And over time, that will cause not just performance issues, but consume all of the disk space, or cause other types of issues with your CA. So catching these things early before they turn into a bigger problem is very important. And then almost the number one thing that we see in almost every organization, missing of password policies on the root CA. Most organizations have a group policy they push out. They say, here's the password complexity, here's the password size, rotation, history, and so forth. Well, because it's group policy, you don't really think about it so much anymore. Offline root CAs that are not part of Active Directory don't get group policies. So almost every root CA winds up being left out of these policy settings. Well, by doing an assessment, we can collect the data, we can look at it and see, oh, you don't have any password policies defined on your root CA. So all of these are examples of things that happen in environments that, if left unchecked, could potentially cause either a security or integrity issue down the road. But if you are collecting information on your PKI, if you're assessing it and figuring out what you need to remediate early, you can head off these problems. All of these issues that I've called out here are things that you can easily detect if you go through the effort. Now, one of the issues, though, is getting the data. Now, there are challenges in getting this information. There's no magical tool that you can run that's going to give you a view of this from Microsoft, for instance. So if you're running ADCS, there is no magical PKI Health information that's out there. PKI View gives you a little bit of detail, but certainly nothing to this level. Frankly, most PKIs lack some type of sufficient configuration in health reporting. It may show one small aspect or one availability thing. If we think of PKI View, for instance, it's really focused on, are your CRLs available? Is your AIA available? And that's about it. It certainly doesn't show anything about your database size, template misconfigurations, and so forth. The other thing is a lot of the tools that are out there are focused on certificate lifecycle. So if we think of Venafi or Keyfactor or other types of solutions, there's lots of reporting and analytics about the life cycles of certificates, but not much about the PKI configuration and the health there. So as a result, a lot of organizations just ignore this. It's not often that we find many organizations that have actually done some type of data collection and assessment of their organization, unless they have an audit requirement or they've brought in an organization like us to do an assessment for them. There's challenges. Many of the logs for like hardware security modules are really meant for the developers and the manufacturers. So they're difficult to read, they're difficult to interpret. If you're going to go and take a look at the certificate services debug logs that get some details, that's a mess trying to interpret. But the data is there. So, from a challenge perspective, it's better to have the data. It just makes it difficult to parse it and go find it. It just seems that the monitoring and reporting of the PKI itself just isn't a priority for the PKI manufacturers. And as a result, that means you have to do it. You have to go out and collect this information. That means you're spending time either manually grabbing the information, trying to write it in scripts, maintain that, work across different operating systems. And then here's the other interesting thing. We're certainly not the only organization out there that says that we do assessments. But we are one of the few that can do it objectively. And the reason for that is if someone says that they're going to do an assessment and it's essentially somebody going through the registry and pulling data and looking for what's right or wrong, and they're making a on-the-spot judgment, that's a very subjective perspective of is this right or wrong? Well, on what basis? When there's tooling and automation that define a best practice, it's no longer left up to somebody who can accidentally forget to look at information or forget to evaluate something. So a lot of times we see the PKI Health assessments as being too subjective. It's too in the moment from whoever's actually going out and getting that. And you may even find that when you do your own assessments of how are you going to score yourself? How are you going to grade what you're doing right or wrong? So where are you going to find the data? If you are working with Active Directory certificate services, which is our primary area of focus, and that's really what we're primarily talking about today, but the concepts work anywhere. With ADCS, the data that you want is there. You have to go looking for it. And if you have a rough idea of what you're looking for and where it's at, you can find the data. Microsoft doesn't hide this stuff away. It's just spread out in a number of places. So when we're talking about things that are relating to our CA itself, whether it's what types of enrollment flags we have, database location, what our default template information is, and so forth, that's going to be in the registry. So HKey local machine, current control set, services, cert serve, config, and then your CA. All of those configuration things are primarily going to be sitting in the registry for the CA itself. There's portions of configuration data that's in Active Directory, and this is in the configuration container. Here you're going to find things like templates. You're going to find the enrollment services objects, the CA objects, what templates are assigned to what CAs, OIDs, and so forth. So all of that kind of information is kept in Active Directory. We've got data sitting in CA policy INF files, and this may be on any CA. There are certain things that may be applicable to a root or a intermediate policy CA or subordinate CA. There's settings in the CA policy INF that may be read only during install, or they may actually be used during renewal processes as well. The good thing is the CA policy INF really doesn't have information that affects a per transactional basis. So it really is either affecting the installation or the renewal of the CA, but there's important configuration details there. There are some things that are kept in the CA JET database itself, things like the CA version index. This is each time you renew a CA and you're asked whether you're creating a new key or using the same key, that index kind of links which certificate and which key is being used. All of that kind of information is stored in the CA database itself. It can be extracted with the right command syntax, but it's not just sitting in the registry, for instance. There are other tools that you can use to find some of this data. Our PSBKI tool, which is available for PowerShell, can help you get some of these details. We also use tools like MS Info to get operating system information. If our database, for instance, is sitting on the D drive and we want to know how large the database is and how much space is remaining, using tools like MS Info will help us get those diagnostic details. And lastly, PKI View, it helps a little bit. If you haven't had a chance to run PKI View.msc, it's provided by Microsoft. And really what it's going to do is enumerate your PKI chain and provide you some basic status information of your revocation information, OCSP, AIA locations, and so forth. It's really kind of oriented to the current status of things and not so much of configuration, though it does tell you where things are located. But a part of a larger data collection, that there could potentially be some helpful pieces of information there. So what are some of the top areas for review? When we do assessments, we kind of break things into 3 areas. And the first one of those is the overall design of the PKI itself. So the things that we want to look at and what we expect if you were to go out and take a look at your PKI is first take a look at the design of your PKI and figure out the architecture. Are you running a 2-tier, a 3-tier, a 1-tier? And then does that map to your needs? It's not unusual to see organizations that have a PKI that's either too simple for them, meaning a single tier enterprise root CA, or having a 3-tier with a policy CA that's really not doing anything. So when you collect that information, there's a little bit of interpretation of why are we running in that architecture and does that map to our needs? There's no silver bullet here. Our general rule of thumb is we tend to assume most organizations need a 2-tier, an offline root CA and an issuing CA. And those organizations that have a specific need to restrict what their subordinate CAs are doing because it's either in a vulnerable place like a DMZ or a factory manufacturing floor or managed by an outside partner, you may want to have a policy CA in place. And that would give you a 3-tier configuration. Some organizations have some very basic PKI needs, and we kind of call it an enablement. They just need a certificate so they can turn on some feature of a product. They're not really trying to fight specific adversarial threats. They may be perfectly fine with an enterprise root CA. But over time, the use and the needs of that PKI may change. So we want to make sure the architecture maps over to what we're doing. We want to figure out where our database is located. If it's sitting on the system drive itself, if that database grows and consumes all of that space, the operating system won't be able to boot. So we want to know where's the database located, how much space is it taking, how much space is left. Again, this is a great example of something that we can detect early before it becomes a problem. If we see that our database is, maybe it's sitting at 1 gigabyte today and I've got 8 gigabytes of space left, I'm not going to worry about it. But if I do an assessment next quarter and now my database is 1.5 gigabytes, now I've got, that still plenty of space. But if I see it every quarter is growing by 0.5 gigabyte, then I kind of know, what, in about a year and a half's time, I'm going to run out of space. Easy to detect now, easy to remediate now. It's very easy to move a database to another drive and update the registry to do that. Or do I wait until it, consumes all the space and then I have an outage issue? So much easier to detect now. I want to look to see what exit and policy modules we have. Are we using, for instance, the SMTP exit module, or are there some alerts that we could be getting? Are there any leftover policy modules from third-party systems, or maybe you're using Venafi or Keyfactor and they have their own policy modules, and making sure that's consistent across your CAs. We want to look at the cryptographic algorithms that are used for the CA. And this is really two things. We're really looking at the CA certificates themselves. So are they in accordance with our standards? Are we doing RSA and ECC? Are they signed with SHA-256 or SHA-384? And then also, what are the CAs using for the certificates they issue out? So are they signing everything SHA-256, SHA-384, and so forth? So you have to remember, when we look at the CAs, we're looking at both its own certificate as well as what it's issuing below it. We want to take a look at the CDP, AIA, and OCSP design. Are you running OCSP? Should you be running OCSP? Is it doing what you think it does? There's kind of a lengthy discussion around OCSP and whether it would provide value in your organization. So it's helpful to take a look at this and see whether you need OCSP. Are your certificate distribution points, are they redundant? Should they be redundant? Do you need them somewhere? Again, easy to kind of detect these things. And if you realize that your OCSP, for instance, isn't actually available, it was intended to be there, but they're not healthy, they're not in your design, you can address that now before it becomes a problem down the road. We want to take a look at your CRL intervals. Now, how often are you publishing your CRLs? This is actually one of the most common places that we see a disconnect between the design and the execution. The design, for instance, for the root CA may say publish the CRL every 6 months or every 12 months, but somehow it got missed. And we've got a root CA that's either sitting with an extremely long, a 6-year CRL or a 6-week CRL. So it's easy sometimes for somebody to select the wrong dropdown, or they type something in wrong. By collecting this information, we can head off these problems before they bite us. CRL overlaps, great thing if you haven't already started doing these. Collect information about what types of overlaps your CRLs are doing. These are kind of your fudge factor. Your CRL interval defines how often your CRL should be published. The overlap is essentially what happens if you forget. What happens if the CRL expires? Can it continue to be used for a certain amount of time? And that's a gross simplification of it, but an overlap can be your friend in certain types of cases. So having that documented and knowing what that overlap is before it bites you is a great thing. Then we also want to look at the logical security. What types of auditing do you have enabled on your CAs and OCSP? What kind of ports are available? The network ports, USB ports, remote access ports, out-of-band KVM ports. We want to look at network connectivity. If it's a root CA or a policy CA, that should be offline. There shouldn't be any network connectivity going to it. The network connectivity that's there, we want to see, is any of that related to hardware security modules, remote access, and firewalls. So, we want to see if any of these things are turned on, and whether there is any admin rights that have been assigned to people that shouldn't be there. So just taking a quick review of how the design and how it's currently configured is a great place to start. The other place that we have some areas that we look at is the current status. So we started with the design. Now we want to look at what's the status of everything. Is it healthy? Are things operating the right way? Are they available? So a great place to start is taking a look at the issuance statistics. And this is frankly a place where the data is there. You just have to quantify it a little bit. And a great thing that we could do is there a large number of failed requests versus valid requests? No. Do you have 4 million failed requests and 30,000 valid requests? Then there might be an enrollment problem. And this has nothing to necessarily do with the PKI design itself, but it tells us that there's some type of a lingering problem. And if left long enough, it could grow into a very large problem. And we see this quite a bit. We go into organizations and we've seen databases that are 40 gigabytes in size, and they really maybe only have 100,000 valid requests. And it really should be like 100 meg at that point. So taking a look at the overall issuance across the space, maybe even by a template perspective, by a CA perspective, is there anything that seems out of whack there? Is the fact that you're getting certificates that are valid, that's fine. But these failed requests are often overlooked because they're sitting hidden in the UI, and most people kind of know about the scrolling bug of certificate services, where you go into one of the areas and you scroll down, and the scroll bar just kind of keeps popping around and looping around. It makes it difficult to find this stuff. So sometimes you wouldn't even necessarily know you could have millions of these failed requests. By gathering the statistics and taking a look across there, we can get a sense of, okay, is enrollment really healthy? We want to take a look at backup events, the backup execution, and the event logs. We want to see, is there anything that's happening there? And the reason we include backups is, strangely enough, we see a lot of CAs and PKI components that don't get backed up. Some of that is intentional, where people have decided that something's not important, and it's not so much CAs, but occasionally, I've been known to have a debate around whether some things like, say, a CDP web server needs a backup. It's a basic OS with IIS installed and a share, and the CRL is being published over there. Could I recover that faster by just rebuilding a box and publishing my CRL versus restoring a backup? Possibly. I'm not an advocate of not backing something up. It's more of, if something happened to my backup, could I get back up and running? Yes. But generally, we want to see backups being run on all of our CAs. There's a lot of times where we've seen root CAs that have never been backed up. Again, if they're offline, somebody has to remember to do this, and sometimes it gets forgotten. It's the end of the build document, or somebody didn't remember to bring a flash drive and they were going to come back and do it. Not backing up your root CA, you're really kind of asking for trouble. Your issuing CAs, we've seen it where the administrators that have deployed their CAs just assumed that the CA being in the proper OU meant it was going to get backed up by whatever the corporate network backup system was. The network backup guys were never told to include the machine, so it hasn't been backed up for a year. So we want to go in and see, can we see backup events in the event log? If it's some type of a OS based backup. If it's a snapshot or a VM, it's a little harder to detect. You may actually have to go to your backup system and see if it's being backed up, but that's a worthwhile event. We want to go looking through the event logs and see if there's any kind of lingering problems, because we tend to see issues that have just been manifesting themselves in the event logs. And you don't have to look for anything specific. Just go into the event logs and look back for the last couple of months. And is there one thing that keeps reoccurring over and over again? And frankly, as a service, when we do assessments, we're there to look at a PKI, but there's a lot of times we found other things that are wrong with the operating system, and they've been sitting in the event log, and no one really goes in there and looks at it. So half the time when we do an assessment, we sit down with the customer and say, oh, by the way, we saw your backup system is unable to install something, or this patching system has been complaining about something for months. And they go, oh, didn't know that. Thank you. So the event log, very easy to get. There's lots of tools to do it. It's just a matter of making it part of your status check. We also look at the DCOM interface itself for the CA. This is how all enrollments happen. It's not unusual to have a CA that looks like it's up and running, but there's a firewall or something that has prevented the DCOM interface from working, and the CA is actually not doing any types of enrollments, but it's up and running. You could create a CRL, you can get all the configuration data, you could work with templates, but it's not actually available. So actually seeing if this port is open and clients can connect to it is an important thing. Going through and figuring out if all of the information is available, like the CRL, AIA, and the OCSP, is it available? Is it up to date? Can it be downloaded? Is it healthy? Is it in all the right places where it should be? Does that match the design? That's an important check as well. We want to see if the HSMs are available. So we check the availability. Are they, if it's an insight for not just things like, an anon Kinetti, but are they responding? Are they healthy? Are they available? Are they functional? We want to make sure that we're detecting any type of failures before it happens. We want to look at all the AD objects, the enrollment services, the templates. Are they present? Are they valid in the right locations? We're looking at patches and hotfixes. Is the CA and the OCSP available? And frankly, hotfixes is a difficult one. There's no magical tool. On our site, if you're not familiar, we do have the ADCS Hotfix Digest, where we track all of the hotfixes and known issues across certificate services. It really is kind of a one-to-one matching of what patches and hotfixes are installed, and do you have all the proper ones. A great example of a way of making sure that if a hotfix is missing and it's available and it heads off a problem, detect it now. And by going through the current status, you'll know that you're missing a hotfix. We also want to look at the CA expiration dates. Is the CA coming up for a renewal soon? And that has a lot of impact. If you wait until your CA expires, you're going to have a lot of problems. But more importantly, that affects the certificates it issues. So if you're coming up on a CA renewal a year from now, that's helpful to know, because all of your certificates that you're going to be issuing between now and when you do your renewal are going to be progressively shorter and shorter, because they can't live beyond the expiration of the CA itself. So we want to make sure that we know when that is happening and make sure that we start planning it early enough. And then, obviously things like PKI View can give you a little bit of that status information. You can certainly take snapshots and figure out whether the CRL and AIA are in the right locations. So that's kind of the current status and availability of the PKI. Then we also want to take a look at the end results, the certificates, the outputs of your PKI. And here we're looking at things like, are you doing key recovery? Is that configured? Are your key recovery agents valid? And most importantly, this one comes up quite a bit. Do you know where your key recovery agent certificates are? Because what we've seen many times is organizations that are doing key recovery, where they're archiving the private key of issued certificates. At some point, somebody somewhere enrolled for the key recovery agent certificates. They configured the CA, and they assumed that they were done. They got everything configured. They don't have to do anything else. Well, they lost track of where those key recovery certificates are. So for us, when we're reviewing these areas, we want to see, are you doing key recovery? And then do you know where those key recovery certificates and the key recovery private keys are, so that you can actually affect key recovery? So making sure you track those things down. We want to look at things like enrollment agents and restricted enrollment agents. Do those map up? Are those the proper configurations? Are there any types of enrollments that can occur that you're not intending to occur? We want to look at certificate templates. And this is frankly probably the number one place that we find that has problems in most organizations. Templates that are configured to include the wrong groups, ACLed too broadly. For instance, authenticated users with auto-enroll and enroll permissions, which should never happen. No, that's typically what results in that 40 gigabyte database with 4 million bad entries, is a template that was set to auto-enroll for everybody in the organization. We want to look at credential roaming, and this is frankly a setting in group policy. Is it enabled? Is it needed? Is it not needed? How is it configured? And where is it scoped? And then looking at the template statistics of how many certificates for each type of template are you issuing, how many come from each CA. Now, if you take a look at a template and you see that one particular template is 80% of what you issue, but you have 3 CAs and they're all coming from one CA, is that intended? Should all 3 CAs have been issuing that? Would you have expected an equal number or some proportion across the CAs? And then also looking at things like expiring certificates. Is there anything critical that's coming up that's not auto enrollment? It could be the appliance. It could be some public-facing site for your partners. Something that is critical. If you're already looking at the statistics, yes, you may have a certificate lifecycle product, or maybe you don't. But if you're already there, you might as well look to see, is there anything coming up, say in the next 30, 60, 90 days that is expiring that we're going to have to do something about. So we talked about these high level areas. So I would be remiss without at least pointing you, how are you going to get this stuff? As I started earlier, all this information is available for you to get. It's just in a raw format. You have to figure out where to find it, where to get it. And these are the most common ways that you could probably use to get the majority of this information. Certutil, obviously, you can see is a great way of getting this. Certutil is going to get a lot of information for you. Things like Certutil Get Reg CA is going to dump all of the CA configuration details. So whether it's where the database is located, how the CA is configured, what type of CA is, and so forth, you'll be able to get all that information. If you want to find out about the CA algorithms that are being used, the CA/CSP registry key will get that for you. So the get reg CA/CSP. You can get overall summary details on your CA configuration with Certutil-CA info. That'll dump a lot of the configuration details. Some of it is in the registry, some of it's pulling from other places. If you want to get information on certificate statistics and template data, the Certutil view command is what you're going to use. If you want to be able to parse these things out between failed, valid, issued, revoked, and so forth, the restrict command is a lot like a where clause in a SQL syntax. So if you're familiar with writing a SQL query, restrict is a way of restricting what type of thing is going to be viewed with Certutil. Our disposition is an error code. So disposition 21, 22, 23, and so forth, that you can easily look up would be the different types of failed, issued, revoked, and so forth. So that's how you can start to build your statistics information. So again, it's going to give you raw certificate information. You can boil it down to the raw numbers if you'd like. Frankly, this is one area that is a challenge. And the reason for that is Certutil does not do a great job with large databases. So as you get up into the gigabyte size of databases, when you run Certutil view, it will most likely time out and you'll get inconsistent data. So this is a place when we do our assessments, we've had to get very creative about how we can dump this from large databases because it's not an easy thing. One of the things I also like to point to for information and diagnostics is what I call a combo diagnostic. And there's actually a really nice thing that we can do here to figure out our CA health. And yes, you can go into PKI view and you can see the overall health of your PKI, but there's one potential problem. And that is that PKI view relies on the CA exchange certificate to determine what the infrastructure looks like. And that could be up to 7 days old or maybe even older if somebody has changed that template. But if we want to figure out what our environment looks like right now, and I'd also like to output it to a file, one of the things I can do is use Certutil in a combo process. So if I take Certutil-CA info exchange and I port it out to a file, it actually creates me a CA exchange certificate right now and puts it into a file. I can then use Certutil verify URL fetch against that certificate. So I'm going to validate that certificate that was just created right now, which means it has all of the latest configuration, all of the latest CA keys in place, and then determine are all of the AIA, CRL, OCSP locations valid, and so forth. So it's a very up-to-date way of doing it. It's all textual as opposed to PKI view, but when we're doing assessments, it's a much easier thing to do. Certutil CA templates will get you details about templates that are available on a CA, and then you can dump individual CA template specifics from there as well. MS Info and SecEdit are great ways of getting information about the OS. If we're looking for password policies, drive sizes, capacities, are we displaying the last logged on user and so forth? All of those can be gathered through some of these other tools. So that brings us to the most important part. And frankly, this is an area that many organizations have challenges with. And that is essentially, what do you do with it? You get the data. How are you going to do anything about this? And it is sometimes difficult to work with organizations where we've gone in and done an assessment. We're able to find all of these areas. But if there isn't a desire to actually remediate and follow up on the issues, it doesn't do a whole lot of good to get this data and see where things are healthy and where they're not healthy if you're not going to do anything about it. The intent is to make sure that we're improving the PKI. So we're going to grab the data. It's a snapshot of what our PKI looks like right now. We should take that and figure out where are areas for improvement. You can certainly pat yourself on the back for the things that you did right. So I'm not saying it all has to be negative, but figure out how can you improve? What are the areas that you're uncertain about? What can we do to head off problems? And then research how do you remediate those issues? And an important thing is when there is a gap, whether it's a root CA that's connected to the network. And I use that as an example. It's not something we necessarily recommend, but your organization may choose to accept that risk. As long as you are accepting the risk and you know what those risks are, your remediation of that issue may simply be, we accept that risk. So when you look at a PKI assessment, just because something is marked as an issue or a problem doesn't mean you have to go buy something or make a misconfiguration. It may simply be, yes, we accept that risk. That's something we're fine living with. So once you identify these areas, a great thing to do is to make sure that you have some way of tracking these. And you can create a simple spreadsheet that has what was the risk category, what was the area, what is the proposed change? Are you going to accept that risk? Are you going to remediate it? And if you're going to remediate it, what's the change? You're going to do what? You're going to change from SHA-1 to SHA-256. You're going to set a password policy to minimum of 8. Determine the impact of the organization. Is it something that would cause an outage, meaning you have to renew a CA or you have to take something down to do it, or is it simply a simple registry key or adding more disk space or something like that can be done without an impact? And then when are you going to do it? Is it something you're going to do now? It's going to be deferred till next year when the next maintenance window comes up, some way of tracking it. And then track the things that you've completed and the things that you haven't had a chance to get to. Otherwise, it's too easy for all of these details that you've uncovered to kind of disappear. And frankly, there may be some things that you find in the assessment that you don't want to know. It's not unusual to see that. You may find something that says, wow, we really shouldn't be depending on it. There could also just be some things that you find that it may be too insignificant that it's not worth making a change. Maybe there was a small misspelling in something and it's not worth reissuing 500,000 certificates because somebody forgot to put a space between CA and 01, and you now have CA 01, and that wasn't what the original design was. It probably isn't a significant enough change that's worth it. Other places, you have to look at a PKI and go, there are enough issues here that we need to move on. We can't just fix these things. We have to find other things to work on. So I know a couple of you have gotten a chance to post some questions across. Over on the poll, by the way, we had asked, how long has it been since you audited or checked the configuration and health of your PKI? It looks like the majority of you responded less than 6 months ago. There was probably the second choice was don't know or never. So that doesn't surprise me to see those things. But let me get through some of these questions that were posted up here. There was a question about, is it a good practice to have the CA database in SAN storage? The way I look at it is, as long as it's reliable, whether that's local or SAN, it doesn't really matter. It certainly is supported to have it on SAN storage. If you look at the Microsoft white paper for clustering of certificate services, which frankly no one does anymore, it was definitely a requirement to use SAN storage. So it is certainly in there. I would say that the CA database doesn't have a lot of excessive disk capacities. Most of the time, you can't find a disk that's small enough that meets just the CA database needs. So it's certainly not a massive size or a massive performance requirement, but you certainly could use SAN storage for that. The other question was getting pricing for an assessment. So I appreciate the question. We actually have an announcement that's going out today. So we've been doing assessments since the beginning of the company, where we put someone on site and we spend a week collecting the data. We've actually automated that for the most part. So finding all this data that we just talked about, going through and finding the registry key, the Active Directory information, I created some early tooling that collected that because, frankly, it's rudimentary stuff that happens repeatedly. And many years ago, I was in Kuala Lumpur doing an assessment, and the organization had 12 CAs, and it took 4 days just to get all the data and then stick it into a report. It wasn't very efficient. So we've been using tooling to collect this information and then providing the analysis. Today, we are announcing an online self-assessment portal. It's the same tooling that we use to collect all this information. So everything that we just went through with Active Directory, the registry, the templates, you can purchase a assessment, download the data collector, and depending on your environment, you could potentially put it on a jump box or one of your CAs. It will find all of your CAs in Active Directory and grab all of this configuration detail. Any of your offline systems like a root or a policy CA, you would obviously have to run it there as well. If you have some firewall complexities, you kind of have to copy the tool around. We can only see what you let us see. But it collects a small set of configuration data. We don't take databases, we don't take keys, we don't take passwords, anything like that. And then you'll upload to our portal, and within a couple of minutes, you'll have an automated assessment report. You'll have all the areas that need improvement. There's about 100 to 150 built-in triggers that the tool is looking for. You'll get a scorecard, you'll get remediation recommendations, you'll get a PDF report. What I particularly like about this, and I'll be very transparent, when we go on site and we do an assessment for an organization, the larger runs run upwards of $30,000 for a week. And that frankly doesn't work for most organizations. With our assessment portal, we've changed to a completely new model where I think works for many organizations. You can buy a single assessment, or you can get a 12-month subscription, which means you can run this every day, every month, every quarter, however often that you want. An individual subscription an individual assessment is $5,000. So a sixth of the cost, or you can get a subscription for $12,500. So for a third of the cost, you can run this as often as you want in your organization. So we'll be continuing to run that. So to the original question for us, an on-site advanced assessment is what we call it now, is $30,000. I think in the industry, you'll typically find $20,000 to $30,000 to have an organization come out and do that assessment. And then if you want to do the online portal, it's much more affordable to do that. Another question here is hypervisor snapshot backups, are they okay? Darren, I know that question. So whenever you do backups outside of the operating system, one of the problems is there are certain triggers inside of certificate services to maintain the database. So I'll leave the decision to you on whether snapshots and other types of host-based backups and whether they're appropriate for your organization. I'll simply address the certificate services side. When they are not being performed within the OS, certificate services doesn't know a backup is occurring. So if you're just snapshotting a drive, snapshotting the virtual machine, certificate services doesn't know a backup is occurring. There are certain maintenance things that happen with the certificate services JET database log files, and they're only truncated and cleaned up during a backup event. So if you're snapshotting, the OS doesn't know it is being backed up. It's not able to maintain these log files. So we recommend having some type of backup or trigger process inside the OS, at least occasionally, to make sure that these log files are backed up. There was actually an update that we posted, I believe it was a month or two ago, about some behavior change with Server 2019 that did a little better job in truncating these logs, but it was still dependent on some type of a backup being triggered off. Another question here is, this is very Microsoft directed. Do you do webinars on Linux-based PKI systems like HashiCorp? So I appreciate it. You know, we historically come at this from certificate services background. That's really where the majority of our expertise is. The concepts are the same when we talk about information that you would want to look at, for instance, when you're doing assessment of design, status, and certificate templates. The concepts around revocation information, availability of OCSP, and those other types of things are all still very applicable. I would say you're absolutely right as far as where you would look for the information or some of the tools that are out there. We don't have a lot of specifics with that. And, we definitely see HashiCorp out there. FutureX has a KMS product, PrimeKey and EJBCA or some other ones that are out there. Certificate services is probably 80% of the PKI market for enterprises. It's a space that we're always looking at new PKIs to look at. And frankly, as we built our assessment portal I was talking about, we designed it to be modular. We're calling it the assessment portal. And today we have an ADCS collector because it's focused on certificate services. In the future, we hope to have the same abilities to do it with HashiCorp or FutureX or EJBCA. So we do see that modularity out there. Another question here is, does anyone know of good documentation for Certutil? There's not a whole lot that's out there or what they can do. There are a scattering of things that are out there. You could certainly do Certutil /? to find the syntaxes, but there's probably a lot of nuances that are there. We cover some of the things in the PKI training classes that we do. But I don't think I've seen a singular blog article that talks about every single one of the syntaxes and how they can be used, because frankly, a lot of them are very versatile. We take Certutil View, for instance, which is a dumping of the CA database. There's probably 100 different examples of things that we could do with that. But that might be a great idea for a blog article. So I'll mark that for the guys and see if we can follow up on that one. Another question here. Thanks for these coming in. We have in the design part, in the case the PKI infrastructure contains HSMs, would it be convenient to review the key generation ceremony? Who has the master key? Where are they stored? Is there an information security contingency plan and so forth? Absolutely. There's many more areas that we cover when we do an assessment than I frankly had time to talk about, whether it's reviewing things like certificate policies and practice statements, the key ceremonies. The good thing is when we're doing assessments and we're touching root CAs, oftentimes we're needing the CAs to be activated. So we kind of get to see the key ceremonies happen. And this is a distinction that we have to make between our online portal and the advanced assessment. With the portal, it's really self-paced. You're driving these things. So we really aren't able to render an opinion or a review of your CP/CPS or your key quorums. So when you're doing the self-assessments, they're just not included because there's no way of objectively collecting information about that today. But absolutely, when you're looking at it, you should really be looking at who are the card owners, who has partition access, how are the HSMs being managed, how are they secured, how are they physically located, are they protected, who can get to them. All of these things are things that we look at when we're doing these types of assessments. One last question we'll get to is how to do monitoring when server certificates expired when not auto-enrolled any central solution or application. We get this one quite a bit. It's essentially a certificate lifecycle management question of how do we know when a certificate expires, if it's not going to be auto-enrolled. Microsoft does not have, I wouldn't even call it a great answer. They have no answer. Certificate services really doesn't have anything when it comes to automated ways of providing alerting. This is really falls into really three camps for us. One is you live with it and you go, okay, I guess I just have to do something about it. The other camp is you build your own thing. You build some scripts, you build a spreadsheet. We've seen people do things in SharePoint. It's not great, doesn't scale, it's not reliable. And then there's third-party solutions. So we work with really 4 different partner organizations that have some spectrum in this space that range all the way from the most expensive solution that's out there that does that and everything else, down to one partner that focuses just on discovery and alerting and reporting. They don't do workflows. They don't do integrations. They're simply discovering your certificates, reporting to you when they expire, giving you some analytics, and that's it. Great thing is it's a few $1,000s versus $1 million. So there's a spectrum in between of other capabilities, but it's really the third parties that are responsible for being able to drive some of those. So just to wrap up, as I mentioned, if you're curious about the assessment delivery, there's probably some great information that's out there, but I know that on our site, we are just launching today our assessment details. The online portal will be available immediately. We will continue to be doing our advanced on-sites as well. And we'll be posting that information up to date. And I think, as a matter of fact, as the webinar ends, it'll actually send you over to that location. So I appreciate everyone showing up today. If you have any follow-up questions, anything we weren't able to get to, we can connect on social media. You can shoot us an email or connect on our website itself. And we invite you to come back next month for our next webinar. And if you haven't had a chance to join us, we do have a monthly office hours, which is more talking heads, no slides, no sales. And you're welcome to stop by and ask your questions there. Again, thanks everybody for coming, and we hope to hear from you soon.